Welcome to our webinar on software maintenance. I hope you're all excited about this topic as we are. Maintenance is one of those stages that take up most of our effort and cost, and honestly get the least attention. Let me relate a personal story to you. Long time ago, when I was at Cisco Systems, I was a product manager for a very successful product. And I joined that group as a product manager at basically what we would call today in a maintenance stage. In fact, a late maintenance stage. So the product was literally a rock star, gained a considerable reputation. The team was very capable, very proud of themselves, and it is loved by customers. Everything is going well. However, the shine has come off. Everybody's attention started moving to the next sexy product they were going to build. And the executive attention and everybody's attention to what's the next best thing that is coming down. So it is left out as a product that is almost crying for attention in some ways. And while it is doing that, what is the perspective of the executives and others? Oh, now that most of the development is done, or all of the development is done, it is working, it's in maintenance stage, we should be able to take all the people away and the money away, cut their budget, throw it into the maintenance stage. So here is a perfect situation. A team that made a product highly successful and losing all their marbles, so to speak. So it basically is a thankless stage. And we wonder about why. And anyway, by the way, if you're interested in the personal story, we can talk at some other time. It actually ended up being a really good story later on, as the product had a second life and achieved much bigger goals. So typically in software products, if we're running into, say, parallel situation, this is what we will notice. We do so much development in the growth stages. We try to basically literally move the mountains. However, once the product has matured enough, it has been released, and once we start calling it a maintenance stage, somehow adding any new product becomes so difficult. It's almost painful. It is so painful that people who ask for a feature are hesitant, and people who want to say, oh, that's such an easy feature, yet they cannot develop and release to anybody. So we had situations where it takes literally half a day to build something new. However, it takes 2 to 3 weeks to release it because of all the baggage the product accumulates in this process. So are you suffering from one of those where you have accumulated so much baggage that maintenance is just a headache? Or you feel you're spending too much money on the maintenance cost? Not you, perhaps, as a product manager or as a development manager, or your executives kind of looking at you and say, why are these guys spending so much money? Why? They should not be. All the development is done. All they need to do is just do some small changes and keep the lights on and continue to satisfy the customer. How difficult can it be? So they will say, how much can I cut down from the budget? There's no discussion ever. The CFO is not going to walk in. Your GM is not going to walk into the team and say, hey, by the way, guys, how much budget should I increase this year? It's always about how much can I reduce. So you're probably already under pressure. Probably you're facing more pressure and say, oh, they're going to cut my budget. I better look for the next project or next job or something. All the talented people start thinking about this if we don't necessarily plan for it. And one more thing that happens in a lot of cases, I'm sure it's slightly different at the top 5-10 companies where products are highly successful. but the business is not 100% satisfied with what the product team is giving them. So a gap starts developing between what the business is demanding from the team and what the team is able to deliver. So you notice this in so many ways. When you are in the development stage, when you are building the product, pretty much every stakeholder, every exec, whether it is the VP of marketing, VP of sales, general manager, CFO, they're all asking, hey, how is the project coming along? Hey, et cetera, can you do that? Can the product, when is it going to come out? Once you are in maintenance stage, you really don't have as much attention. And however, you have demands. Demands could be the sales team requiring certain things the development team cannot do for multiple reasons we talked about already, such as lower budgets and lower resources and higher workload. Basically, and also you don't have as many engagements or as many connections between the stakeholders and the product team. In most cases, we have seen it starts faltering. And what else do we suffer from? We really feel like sometimes it's a thankless job. We're like hamsters on a wheel, keep going in circles, never ever making progress. You say, oh, okay, I'm done with one more release, one more version. Okay, the next one starts. It's like painting the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge. You reach one end, you got to start all over from the beginning end by the time you finish one coat of paint. There's never any break. So you feel like, how do I actually learn from this? How do I grow in my career? How do I come out ahead of this? How do I become a hero? Those conversations happen less in this stage, and it kind of puts a hammer on a wheel syndrome on people. If you are suffering from this, you're in the right place, because we're going to talk about them and talk about a few ways on how to get through them. We think it mainly happens because, in short, maintenance stage, we end up there by default, not by design. And what we're going to suggest here is fundamentally change it. That's all we're going to talk about. We're going to simplify this, demystify this, and say, okay, hey, if we're in a maintenance stage, we're in a maintenance stage. Nobody can avoid it. If we're in a maintenance stage, what can we do to have, if not the same level of excitement and the success and the energy and the cohesiveness and the engagement stakeholders we had in the development stage? How do we bring it to the maintenance stage so that we actually achieve the business goals? Because the business actually depends on the maintenance stage a lot more. In fact, a lot more than when the product is in development stage in most cases. So what is amazing is that if we look at the total cost of the project development, most people say about 70% of the costs come from maintenance costs. Okay, that's little more than 2/3, right? So if it is going to take, by the way, the lowest that we have heard of, or most studies point out, is still about 40%. So if 2/3 or more of your total cost is going into this, how come it gets such little attention? How come people take their eyes off of planning and say, oh, it's just maintenance? There's a huge backlog, give to the team, and go mark them up in some P1, P2, P3, or some other oversimplified mechanism, and keep asking them, hey, can't you work 16 hours instead of 12 and get more of them done? Oh, by the way, that particular ticket has been sitting there for 3 weeks and it hasn't been delivered. What's wrong with you guys? And the costs are going up, whereas CFO and the project management office are sneering at you and say, guys, we got to do something about this project, which makes the team even more nervous. Are they going to cut it? Are they going to? So this is a bad karma all over. So these are the characteristics of a maintenance stage that make it so important to talk about. So let's get to it. So let's characterize what maintenance is. It has an entry point and exit point. We always talk about everything we talk about in the context of a product lifecycle. Okay, so we talked about at least 4 stages: the proof of concept, a minimum viable product, and then getting to a minimum revenue product, which is something that is released to users en masse, and then we go a scaling product, a scaled product, right? So maintenance starts as soon as you release a product for revenue to a large set of users. Once you have given a product to a user, you are obligated to maintain it. That is, users are expecting it to be available, to be working in a certain way, to produce results for them. So you have to do that at the same time meeting the business goals. So this is not the support stage. What's a support stage? Support stage means you are not doing many of the things, such as it's almost in the final stages. It's a cash cow. You don't want to do technology upgrades. You do not want to do any enhancements. You do not want to add new browsers, new devices, nothing. If there is a bug that has come in because our call center is taking a lot of calls on it, or some corner case has been missed in the testing or automation or wherever, those things cause some problems. Somebody is going to fix those bugs. That's about it. So it's 100% reactive. But what's maintenance? Maintenance means the product is alive and kicking, and the business is investing in marketing the product and growing the user base and trying to make more money on it. And they're still investing in the product actively. So this is an active stage where we really need to not only meet those user expectations in terms of availability and performance and stability, etc., quality, etc., we also have to meet business goals of addressing the different market segments, etc. We like to sometimes talk about Twitter as an example. The ability to tweet has been there since the first release. With whatever else the company is doing, maybe some things to support the ads, to increase the length of a string, whatever, the customer's expectation, the ability to tweet, is more or less the same. Their expectation is if I tweet it, it's going to reach all the people I want it to reach. That has to be supported. And that requires the concept of maintenance. So that's basically why we want to separate. The maintenance requires still the engagement from the wider product team that includes the product manager or the product owner and the development team, to some extent the architect and all the stakeholders, whereas the support does not require all of the strategic people in that activity. It is primarily an operational and reactive in nature. So now that we have defined the maintenance stage, let's Subhash, do you have any thoughts or any comments on what we have been talking about?
No, Sinu, you covered it very well. Thank you so much. It's surprising, like you said, on how much of lack of awareness exists on the maintenance stage itself. What does it mean? How does one handle it? How does one plan for it to be effectively navigating it when the time comes? There's a lot of focus on product development itself, but not enough discussion going on about what happens when the product goes live and reaches customers. So thank you for introducing us to that concept.
So let's. I'm going to kick off a thought process for software maintenance, and Subhash, perhaps you can walk us through and how to build a complete strategy. So if we look at the fundamental problem, I'm still kind of defining and to some extent quantifying the problem, and I will do that easy part and leave it in your hands to do the difficult part of answering it. Okay, I like that role. So let's first look at it. The reason most people cannot manage maintenance and it becomes a headache is they really don't know. They really don't know what they should be getting out of the maintenance stage, right? And there's no metric for it. How can you tell? How can you tell a team, hey, why don't you do maintenance 10% better? What do you mean 10% better? Maybe can you do 10% cheaper? Oh, that's a good question. At least that I can answer that. So basically, we all know you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So whatever strategy we have, the strategy is going to achieve certain business goals. So those goals, for them to know what the costs are, what the different variables, metrics are, we must give them the ability to measure. We need to instrument our software as well as our processes so that we actually can quantify what we're doing in the maintenance stage. That's the first thing in this strategy. What's the second thing? We need to actually have some goals and roadmaps. Most teams, as I said, end up in the maintenance stage by default, not by design. They don't plan and say, well, even though I'm going to spend 70% of my total money in that stage, I'm not going to worry about it. My goal is to release the product. Once I release the product, I'm done. So the thing is, they take their eyes off. They don't have a roadmap. Most people in the maintenance stage, if you ask them for a roadmap, they will give you the bucket list of all the backlog spread over multiple weeks, multiple sprints, multiple months. They don't give you a roadmap. Do they have business goals? Does the business define goals that are comprehensive, not just like cost variable or, oh, I'm going to give you 12 people for the maintenance stage. That's it. You do what you want to do with 12 people. Who are they? Are they brick masons? Are they developers? Are they architects? Are they testing? What do you mean by 12 people? So they don't have a business goals defined well, and they don't have roadmaps well. That means they fall off from having a very good strategy and plan and tactics to just tactics. No more strategy, no more plans. That cannot be. What's the other one? So the transition from the development stage to maintenance needs to be consciously accepted and embraced. So one of the things we talked about extensively is whether you are in the proof of concept stage or in the MVP stage, don't take on too big a chunk at one time, because any small mistake can turn into a big mistake if you keep going with it for 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. So we believe in breaking each stage into smaller phases so that they're manageable. But once the product goes to the customers or users, then it's a very different aspect. You don't have phases now. You cannot give them and say, I give you half the ability to put an ad on my system and I give the other half ability later. So that's not the best way. So what we need to think of here about is an equivalent to those manageable pieces is a release plan. What does a release plan really mean? Well, let's leave the difficult part to Subhash, as we agreed to talk about. So we break it into versions to manage, and he's going to talk about how to do it, what does it mean, etc. And finally, when the product crosses that big step that is going from development to maintenance, they just kind of default with the same teams, same structure, same processes, same methodologies. In all honesty, to really achieve what you need to achieve from the maintenance stage, you need to consciously take that into consideration, the characteristics of what maintenance needs, and adjust. Even if you need to restructure, you guys adjust the team. You need to tweak the processes. You need to tweak the methodologies. Sometimes even you need to tweak the tools, technologies, and everything else. So this is how I expect different elements of a strategy would contain for the maintenance stage. But let's get organized on how you would approach this, and with a few takeaways from this. If Subhash, if you please lead us with how you would go from this picture and break it down for us so that we can, without getting a PhD in product management or software development, a team can approach software maintenance with easy to follow step-by-step process. Thank you.
Sure, Sinu. I'm going to continue the same kind of thought process that you're saying, that there needs to be, first of all, a strategy in place before you can tackle a problem, right? So we are going to approach this from the point of view of shining a light on each aspect that Sinu discussed. and compartmentalizing the problem and exposing different aspects that form the part of it. Let's talk about what kind of costs would be associated, first of all, with maintenance. And when I say costs, it doesn't necessarily mean cost in terms of money, but it could be number of people, it could be the effort that is being spent, it could be the timeline associated with doing changes. So if you were to look at it from a very high level point of view, maintenance would have these kinds of costs associated with development costs, which is going to touch upon how the product is maintained, how the development is protected from this maintenance stage, and how do we organize the release plan, the cycles of the product reaching the customers effectively to ensure that maintenance does happen but does not go back and affect development. How do we do that? How do we handle operational costs of managing a maintenance stage product? Does it mean that if I were to have a product live and if I have a version of the product in maintenance, I have double the cost? How can I optimize? How can I combine them and automate a large extent of it so that I don't have to spend time in terms of people or the effort that is necessary to maintain these infrastructure? What kind of people do I want as part of my maintenance team? Do I want the entire team that was part of development replicated under the maintenance model? That wouldn't give us any kind of cost optimization, right? So how do I think about optimizing how I build the product, how it is getting into maintenance stage, what kind of people we need as part of the team that maintains the product? That's all bundled under people costs. And there are many other costs that play a part apart from these three. If you are going to spend time supporting people, if you're going to spend time collecting the changes, enhancement that have to happen, that come as user feedback when the maintenance product and the maintenance reaches the customers, all that is being bundled into these other costs. Between these four, most of the aspects that would contribute to the cost of a maintenance stage product can be captured. Let's explore each one and understand what they mean and what could be a potential strategy that we could use to tackle the cost. Sinu touched upon the aspect of a long-running product. We expect all our products to run for years and years, right? But we cannot keep on developing something for a long time. We want it to be developed in chunks, and we want each chunk to be given to the customer so that, one, they get value out of the product early in the game. Two, they give us valuable feedback that we can actually go back and incorporate into the product. So in a product lifecycle, we generally advocate doing this in the form of phases. We say create or break the product vision into multiple phases. Tackle each phase individually and create the functionality that is addressing the vision of that phase in the product and give it to customers, right? If you tilt it over, what each phase actually means is a particular version of the software that we are giving off to customers. The slide here shows an example of it, but if you were to take any big software corporate out there which produces and gives out software, they would follow this strategy. Take Oracle database as an example. I think it's at 12.0 or 13.0 now, but every time Oracle releases a version, they have addressed a unique piece of functionality that is part of their overall vision as part of that vision. So as part of that version. So when a new change comes up, they actually slot it in the next version. So the customer who receives the version from Oracle is crystal clear on what he's getting as part of this version of the software, while Oracle is free to continue developing the next set of functionalities on the next version of the database. This generally applies to most software packaging that we see out there. And there are certain aspects of it that help the development team do their work better when they follow this mechanism. For example, because the version that has reached the customers is automatically termed to be in maintenance, it will get into a different mode of development. There will be bug fixing going on. There'll be a smaller team associated with it. It will be tightly connected to support because customers will have that version in front of them when they call them. That's a different pipeline that gets activated. While the actual development of the software itself for the next version can continue unhindered. They are not controlled or affected by what kind of activities are happening as part of this maintenance stage. As a second side effect and a good side effect, what happens is when a product evolves, you start in a certain way when you begin. You have assumed a certain scale of users that use the product. You have put in an architecture that is supposed to handle that scale. You have assumed that certain pieces of functionality will come into the product within the next 2-3 years. But as you grow and as users come in, you get more feedback from them. And there might be things that you want to fix. We call that technical debt sometimes when we accumulate problems in the system, known problems in the system for growth temporarily, but those that we have to go and fix over the long term. As a side effect, we are now free to address those technical debt problems in a much more comprehensive manner. When the product team, the development team sits down to think about what they need to do for the next version, they are free of the worry of actually maintaining the customers or ensuring that customers have a stable software version. That's a different pipeline. Somebody else is handling it and they can go crazy doing all the fixes and the architecture enhancements that are required for the product itself. Let's explore that a little better. If you were to think about the product lifecycle and map it to a development lifecycle, then the entire initial development that you would do before your product reaches the revenue stage where you have put it out and customers are paying you, that entire piece would get chunked into one single version. That's when you are running very fast. You don't want to be handicapped by releasing something to customers that is half-baked. So you want a minimum amount of functionality to be falling into place before you go into the revenue cycle. That can be termed entirely as initial development. And when you give something out to customers, like Sinu mentioned, that's the marker when the maintenance stage starts, right? It's much easier now because we can cut off that functionality that is in the software and call it version 1.0, right? The product development continues as is on the main base, but the version 1.0 that was given to customers will take a life of its own. That's typically what we call as the maintenance stage. That's where a separate team comes into place, different processes come into place, and we approach it from the point of view of reducing cost instead of actually developing value. So on and so forth, right? After version 1.0, we would want to develop some more functionality, and that comes out as part of version 2.0 and then version 3.0. Each one will have a life cycle of its own. Now, how do you define what is the time frame between version 1.0 or 2.0? Or what are the conditions when I decide that it's time to release 2.0 and get to the next version? Well, it's a very judgmental aspect and it varies per product. It can be calendar based. Some people say every 9 months I'm going to give out a version. Whatever is in there is in there. Some other products say that they are going to be functionality based. When they have achieved the target of what they wanted to do as part of the next version, that's when the version change happens. Both approaches are completely fine and they're valid and depend on the kind of product that we're talking about. There are further aspects that you need to remember and think about when you decide to version. Take SAP, for example. When SAP releases a new version, there's an entire ecosystem that has to rise along with it. They have to get trained, they have to know what the changes are, they have to know what needs to be done to upgrade their own implementations to the newest version, right? So there's a lot of effort and probably some time and cost involved in getting the whole ecosystem up. So SAP-like companies have to think a lot about the time frame that is required to get that entire ecosystem following them. If they release too early, then the time will not be enough and people will fall way back in adopting the new version. If they go on for too long, then we are breaking that earlier thought process of chunking up product and giving some value to customers as early as possible. So you have to achieve a balance between the both of them. There can be other criteria like how much of stability does your customer expect from your software? Going back to the Oracle database example that we took, when Oracle gives out a database version and advocates that its customers come up to it, it is also guaranteeing at the same time that this version will work better, if not equal to the previous version. So there is a guarantee and an SLA that is going along with the product version. And because of that, the company has to be a little more careful. They have to invest more time and effort in ensuring it is stable. They have to put the infrastructure in place to fix bugs as they come up very quickly because they are committed to an SLA with the customer. There are other aspects. What is the kind of technology churn? Did an infrastructure piece that you have as part of your product suddenly get offloaded from your vendor? Is your support requirement increasing because there are too many bugs in the software? You take all these thought processes and bundle them up and decide when it's time to get to the new version. And when the new version happens, you get to the stage of maintenance for that specific version, and it has a timeline. There's a pin that you put on the calendar saying, when I release this version, the older versions get terminated in terms of support, in terms of bug fixes at a certain date in time, so that you can still continue running faster and you're encouraging your customers to come up and upgrade in versions, but you are publishing the timeline of each version as you move forward. That's about operational costs.
Yeah, sometimes somebody may manage 2 versions for A/B testing or certain aspects, but that's minor detail.
Correct. Let's take another aspect, right? Let's explore operational costs. This forms a big chunk of maintenance. And if you're not careful, this is the part that eats into your bottom line. Most SaaS products, and we are involved in that domain, right? So most SaaS products use cloud platforms to host their product. And there is a multitude of servers servicing the customers. There are different components running in different servers. They are handling failover. They are handling high availability. So there's a copy of the product present in different servers. Sometimes they are hosted across regions. So there's a cost associated with running a product in the cloud for high availability. You are ensuring that the customer has access to your product all the time. The flip side of that is if you remain attached to too many versions, you have the danger that your entire cloud is getting duplicated. You have too many copies of the cloud servicing the customers. Then you are left with picking up the baggage of maintaining all of them. Let's say you want to upgrade the software version of an underlying, let's say, a database. You are now going to upgrade the database across all these maintenance stage versions, right? That's 1 into 5 or 1 into 6 times the effort that you used to spend when the product was initially getting developed. So looking at it from the other side, what can you do? One, you cannot move away from the committed SLAs to customers. You need the performance guarantees that the servers offer. What you can do is put in a structure in place where the servers are scaled up or scaled down based on the load they have. Maybe the 4th version that you released 2 years ago, that doesn't have too many people operating on those servers. So you would want to tone down the amount of what is called provisioning that you have done for that maintenance version, right? Now you can do this manually, and you can have a team of people looking at this and analyzing the performance metrics and doing the scaling up, scaling down manually. But it's much better and easier to automate it. And there are many technologies available in the market now to do this. As an example, you can use a combination of Docker, which are containers, and Kubernetes, which are deployment mechanisms. We bundle this under the umbrella of infrastructure as code, which is simply meaning that you are maintaining your entire infrastructure in the form of a script. But doing this will allow you to put in rules of when the server should scale up, when the server should scale down. And you can optimize the number of servers by combining different components. All the goodness of actually tweaking the infrastructure map come to you when you use this kind of methodologies. There's also another side effect. Most of the costs can come from the platform point of view. If you have used Azure for so long, then you are locked into Azure in some sense. And if they jack up the prices, everything goes up from your bottom line, from an expense point of view, and goes away from your bottom line, right? Doing things from this infrastructure as code point of view, as we discussed, will also enable you to be cloud independent. There's nothing preventing you from going into a competitor platform just because your existing platform is not giving you the kind of cost savings that you had envisioned. So thinking about operational costs from day one and handling a little bit of in the form of scripting and deploying, as well as some aspects of the product architecture itself, will save you a ton of money when it comes to maintaining different versions. Let's go to the other side of the problem, right? The people costs. You generally don't want to spend as much effort on maintenance stage as you would do on a product development stage. You want to put the heavy hitters and the really smart people on the development team, and you would want to rotate them across maintenance teams, but you would generally want to keep the maintenance teams lightweight and targeted on the problem state. So with that goal, that you want the maintenance teams to be as small as possible while also having the development team running full fledged in terms of changing the software itself for the next version, we can think about three aspects that come up. One is the technology itself. If you have too many technologies as part of your product, and you have heard this common adage in the market, people say you should use the right tool for the right job. Well, it's well intentioned, but when you have too many technologies as part of your product over the long term, it has the adverse effect that you need to have too many different kinds of specialists as part of your team, not only as part of the development team, but also as part of the maintenance team. And that has this ripple effect, right? Every single maintenance version will have to have these experts part of it. So sometimes it makes sense to take a step back, and once your product has reached a stable stage, invest time and effort and money reducing the number of technologies that you have in your product to a bare minimum, so that you can have these downscale savings on the maintenance side. Also, if you think about a development team, it has different roles of people associated with it. They're running full steam in organizing the backlog, thinking about what to do first, organizing sprints, designing UX. These functions are typically development-oriented functions. They are not part of maintenance. In maintenance, you do similar functions, but they're at a very low scale. You're bug fixing, you're handling customer feedback, you're doing as minimal as an effort as possible to keep the version clean and running without having too much of churn in it and giving stability back to people. So the number of roles that you would have as part of a maintenance team would reduce. And this goes back to Sinu's discussion about thinking about the maintenance phase as a separate stage and planning for it. It is not equal or comparable to the development stage. It is different, and we have to be mindful in this transition. The third part, and often the ignored part, is the processor stage. We tend to think the maintenance team can follow the same processes we follow the rest of the company during development, and that is not true. What is required is actually a very small set of functions, subset of functions from the original process that we can just take and put into the maintenance set. If we do these three things, then we are automatically getting to a stage where the number of people required per maintenance team or per maintenance version is drastically reduced. And the last one that we talked about was other costs. Let's take a different look at it. When we talk about costs and we want to be very specific on deriving this quantitatively for the maintenance stage, we want to be able to account things like, why am I getting too many calls for this version in my support center, as an example. We had this case in the past where one of our clients who was running a call center at a certain point of time was getting about 60% of calls related to password reset. What was the reason? The software itself did not have the functionality to allow people to reset the password. So users had no choice but to call the call center and say, my password, I've forgotten it. Can you reset it, please? It's a classic example of when support gets a valuable feedback into the system of what needs to be developed, but they're also under the pump because 60% of the calls is concentrated on one single feature. So they want to reduce the amount of pressure on them. Now, the problem in a typical, in a traditional model of handling development and maintenance together is when support requests for this change, it goes into the same bucket as the development team's overall bucket. Now, all of us know how difficult it is for one feature to be pushed down and one feature to be pushed up in a normal product development lifecycle, right? So there's a very good chance that the customer feedback or the support request will get pushed down or will get treated at the same level as everything else. But we want it to be treated separately. By removing the versions into a different flow and continuing the product development in a different flow, we are giving a chance for different kinds of input with different priorities to come into the same backlog. On the right side, you see a tagging model that we talk about, and we have talked about it in the past few webinars as well. Everything that enters the system, be it a bug, an issue, a feedback, a request, an enhancement, everything is tagged uniquely in a certain way so that when the time comes, we can use these tags to prioritize what is the most important thing to do. For the next version that we build, we don't want to miss out on this feature of resetting password, because I know for a fact that a major chunk of my cost for maintenance is coming from the support department, which is handling that particular problem, right? So we want to instrument, of course, this depends on different, on a case-by-case basis, it matters per version and the kind of structure you have. But this is a very good example of how you can think creatively to capture the costs that are happening across the company apart from your direct maintenance costs, which can be alleviated by doing some small fixes in the next version. So let's take a step back again, right? These are the 4 costs, and you have to keep these costs in mind when you think about maintenance. But on day one, when you sit down and you want to focus on getting to the maintenance stage properly, what are your big ticket items? One is operations, and we talked about how to reduce infrastructure, etc. As part of that, you also need to be thinking about how do you version, when do you release, what is the kind of SLAs that you have with your customers that are pushing you towards taking these decisions. All those items go into that bucket when you think about it. Then you think about your team. How do you structure your team? How do you plan for the next version that is coming up? How do you optimize between the core development team and these maintenance teams? Do you have the option of introducing fresh people into the system at both levels? That's something that you need to think about, and that goes into the people bucket. The architecture bucket is, we talked about it in a certain way across all these costs, but when the architecture is nimble and is flexible, you tend to have lower maintenance costs because your product is scalable and it is built in a way that small changes can be done very easily. So plus, the versioning approach, if you think about it, also gives you the ability to improve architecture much better. If you have a product that is always live and it's the same version that is reaching the customers, you're hamstrung in the amount of changes that you can do for the product. But if you have a separate version in parallel and you are left free to handle the bulk of development on the new upcoming version, you tend to be a little more free when it comes to doing major changes in architecture, which will be a little more effortful today, but which will give a lot of cost savings in the later term. That goes into that bucket of architecture. And infrastructure, we talked about it in the head of operations, but how do you handle not just the cost of those servers, but the way you automate the entire infrastructure? What scripts are in place? How many people do you need to maintain? What kind of automation can you put into the platform, the cloud platform, that will maintain the infrastructure by itself without us having to take care of it by putting people on the job? That goes into that bucket. So if you look at these 4 buckets and jot down what your product is doing with respect to each of them, and then combine that with the cost metrics that we established earlier, you have a solid understanding of what it takes for you to maintain your product. Let's take a different approach and combine the two into some kind of, so in Lean Startup circles, there's something called innovation accounting. That is a way of capturing and quantifying the cost that you are that you're doing when you go about building a product. A similar approach can be applied to maintenance as well. Why not combine all these aspects into one single structure to arrive at a quantifiable cost for your maintenance? That can not only help you understand your strategy better and help you refine it if required, but also gives you a concrete base on which you can plan your next set of steps. Is support contributing majorly to your maintenance cost? You go about fixing the problems that support is facing from customers. Is infrastructure your most important problem? Then for the next version, you double back and build a lot of goodness in your infrastructure capabilities and automate most of them. So the cost will dictate where the savings are, and the savings will dictate what should probably be part of your future feature set when you release the next version. The bit.ly URL at the bottom will give you access to the sheet itself, but think of it as a starting step. Your business and your product might be completely different from what we are giving as examples here. This is the start of the mechanism, but feel free to enhance the sheet in any way you see to capture the cost accurately from your business point of view, from your product point of view. Let's take a step back again, right? And let's put everything together. Sino, would you want to capture this and tie it back to the original discussion?
Yeah, absolutely, Subhash. So first of all, thank you for going through how one should approach the maintenance stage and the best practices while you're in the stage. So I think there's a lot that can be done, perhaps, in addition to whatever we talked about. There are more things, but the main thing that we need to come back to and look at it, if you take only one away from this whole webinar, is corporation has a lot of the teams have best practices while they are doing development and in the growth stage. But once they say it is maintenance stage, somehow they don't follow their own best methods, whatever has worked for them. So our primary recommendation, one thing to take away is continue your best practices. If you don't have one, adopt some, but plan for maintenance stage. Don't just end up there. And you can actually not only survive the maintenance stage, you can succeed in the maintenance stage. It's not a punishment box where if somebody is not behaving well to dump in the development team, but that could be the place that could work as the attraction for somebody to join the team if done well. That requires keep the engagement with your stakeholders, do the product planning, have an active roadmap, continue to manage that bridge between the business teams and the technology teams. Those practices must be embraced fully, and treat maintenance thing as something you need to actively do. That's very much the first thing to bring back. Then I'll leave it to you, Subhash, to what you're talking about. This is the second point. That is, if you had phases while you're in the development stage, so that we are making our problem more manageable, taking it smaller chunks, so that we're biting what we can chew and catch our mistakes early and in intermediate checkpoints before we progress. We need to do a similar approach to something that is in front of the users in the maintenance stage. We need a mechanism like versions that can help us put boundaries around some of our work and release versions in a methodical and an intelligent way. And Subhash talked about different ways you can do versioning. If you have a lot of partners and ecosystems and downstream people to manage expectations, you may go by a fixed calendar type versioning, or if you have some SLAs that determine what you need to do, you can do some SLA-based versioning or functionality-based versioning. But the central idea is more important than some of the final details here. That is, you need to break. Maintenance is not one ongoing train that goes on for years, while the company's attention is on the user metrics, market metrics, revenue metrics, sales metrics, and we need to make sure the development team is not lost in that and manage that using versions. And the third thing that we need to take away from this is, again, the team is not just a cost item or a number of people, but actually active management, active structuring need to be done. If you need to move people with the appropriate skill sets, appropriate level of experience that is more suited for the characteristics of the maintenance stage, we need to do so. Teams and their associated processes as well. The KPIs they are measured by, and the inter-team interactions, etc. When we talk about teams, you really cannot continue in a default mode from the development stage to maintenance, but act as if you have a fresh, clean sheet of paper. And how would you put up your team for maintenance stage? It's so important you do it for the success of maintenance stage. And finally, automate and instrument. We talked about it. You cannot manage what cannot measure. Make sure now you're adding all the things that we want to take into consideration for maintenance stage. That is, what is coming back from the users, what is coming from the support, what is coming from our own operations and infrastructure, what is coming from our own dev team and their processes. Instrument each of them so we can actually go into what we really believe everybody should be doing, that is data-driven product development. You want to be scientific about it, eliminate subjectivity, somebody coming in and say, this is not how, where the problem is. How is the maintenance going? The team is terrible. So we need to move away from those subjective to very scientific data-driven one that requires instrumenting and automating this. So these are the takeaways. And again, when we talk about setting up the teams on the third point, make sure we're talking about the associated scrums and the whole system of how we approach the process as well. Maybe whatever stand-up and sprint and scrum system you're following for development, we need to rethink that. That's appropriate for the versions that you are planning around. So this is the takeaway. By focusing on them, we think the reason, first of all, right, why there's so much emphasis, up to 70 to 80% of the total cost of project development going to maintenance. What we're talking about is attacking it, just destroying it, bring it down significantly. Yet, it's not just the cost. Achieve the results while you do it. So that's the focus, and it deserves all the attention we can give it, and then some. Thank you, Subhash.
It's almost like leveraging the maintenance stage rather than surviving with it. Right? We started off by telling people avoid it and hate it and run away from it, but here's an opportunity to actually do it well and do it in a way that actually pumps up everybody.
You can actually succeed in this stage. You can become a hero in this stage.
Yeah. So from these learnings, if you want to ask your own product management questions, some of this might help you get to understand where you are and what you need to do. Is your product in maintenance stage? Is active development is going on, or do you have versioning in place? That will help you, first of all, figure out whether you need to worry about maintenance at all, or have you completely not kept track and you're already in maintenance. That's something that will come out of this, come out of the answer to this question. If you are in maintenance stage, or if you're not, if you think you are not in maintenance stage, are you planning enough for it? Are you putting structures into place today so that you derive the benefit later in terms of cost, in terms of people, in terms of strategy, in terms of business model? Are you planning enough today to leverage that maintenance stage that is going to come up in the future? Are you planning in terms of people appropriately? You have the thought process and the structure in place to staff your teams and get new people into place while not causing breakages, slow down, or affecting the development process when you do get into maintenance stage. And when you are doing all of this, are you sure that your customers are being serviced efficiently? If you have 4 different versions, are people being coaxed to come to the new version effectively? Are your customers on the oldest version being serviced in the same SLA that you have agreed to do with the last version? These questions help you not only identify the missing pieces in your maintenance strategy, but also, if you have not implemented them, prompt you to put that into place. Without those, well, you will be in maintenance stage, but you'll not be consciously driving it. It will be driving your entire strategy. You are not trying to leverage it to make the most of it. Maintenance will suck you dry in whatever way the problems arise without allowing you to control the development of the product or the life cycle of the product. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sinu, do you have anything to add?
No, all good. And we are here if you want to talk about, hey, we have this problem. We have operational cost that is too much, or this is how we are thinking about organizing the teams. You want to bounce off your ideas, want some ideas, we're available. Feel free to call us. We are here and we'd love to work with you, and wish you all the success while you are dealing with this maintenance page. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.